Hey guys, and welcome back to the shop. Or if you're new, welcome. So today we're going to put the rest of the bottom end of my YZ144 together. Let's take a look and see how that goes. So here's an important tip for anybody who's taken one of these things all the way apart and putting it all back together again. So I'm making good progress here. And I'm looking at what I have left to do, right? The exhaust power valve drive gizmo, right? I got my clutch back together. I have to go back together, and I broke down and bought new plates and new springs for that. And I've got the parts from the clutch cover from my last video. And as I'm doing this, I'm thinking, what is this? Right? Obviously that goes somewhere, and couldn't remember where. Now, I've been watching some great videos from a guy named Michael Sabo, who does a step-by-step bottom end rebuild. Really great job. In addition to that, I've got my Yamaha service manual. I've got a Climber Yamaha manual. And this is pretty important, when I took it apart, I took a whole bunch of pictures. So long story short, this is a 99. The video from Michael that I've been watching, he's doing a slightly newer engine. The bottom line is this piece isn't on the newer engine. So finally, I found in my shop manual the picture that shows where that thing goes. I looked at my photos and I could see, sure enough, it's a bearing retainer. And this is where it's supposed to be. Now, I think I can get that back in there without having to take my newly installed clutch basket back off. So we're going to give it a shot. So long story short, even though there's a lot of great videos and instructions, always take pictures and then make sure you've got a shop manual or a couple of different shop manuals specific to your bike. It'll really help when you get stuck. So here I am with that plate in there, trying to see if the bolt that holds it in is going to fit. And as you can see, you can get it started, but you can't get it straight. So sadly, I've got to bend back that retaining washer on the clutch hub and pop that thing off of there. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so as you can see, even sometimes with a lot of experience, you get things wrong. So I could not get this back in there without taking the flywheel off again. And when you look at it, not the flywheel, the clutch basket, when you look at it, I really should have noticed that empty hole, and I didn't. So an extra 10 minutes, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And there we have it, back where it's supposed to be. All right, here we are torquing down that center bolt for the second time. Got my clutch holder tool there, and we go until we hear the click. And there it is. Now at this point in time, I've got just a little over 100 videos on YouTube. You'd think that I would know what I'm doing. But all of the video I made of putting that clutch pack together, actually putting in the new springs and the bolts, is gone. Because apparently I had the camera off when I thought I had it on. So I've got a whole bunch of film of really nothing. So I basically, those are new clutch plates, right? New fiber plates, new steel discs. Soaked them in oil for a bit, put it back together, new springs, torqued them down to about, I think it was about 8 or 10 foot-pounds. And now you can see in the background, I've got the water pump cover, basically. And I had replaced all the bearings and the seals in that the first time around, so they're not old. They're actually in very good shape. I'm putting here the drive for the power valve back in. And then once we get that in there, we're going to go ahead and put this cover back on the engine. You can see I've got the gasket in place already with the locating pins, and that power valve thing can be a little bit fidgety. You got to hold it in while you flip it upside down, and then basically get it aligned right, jiggle it around a little bit. And being careful, you'll feel when it engages. You don't have to force this. Sometimes a little gentle tap here or there, and there it goes. Good to go. Check that the water pump is moving. Check that the power valve is engaging correctly. And we are all set. So now we'll grab the screws, we'll run those in, and we'll be good to go. All right, so with that out of the way, we clean up the water pump cover. My impeller was still in place. You'll see the gasket there. I use a tiny, tiny bit of gasket sealer on that. I just have more luck with my water-cooled bikes when I do that. And you simply get that cover in place. There are 2 long bolts and 2 short bolts that hold it, and then there's the one for the drain plug. So we're going to run those in, and we're going to be good to go. All right, so for anybody who watched my last video, you saw me struggle taking apart the clutch cover, because there's only one way to get this bearing out, and that's either to, from the inside, push it out, or from the outside, push it in. And if you watch that video, you can see I broke this cover as a result of trying to do that. And I was lucky enough to be able to find a new Boysen cover and not have to pay $1 million for it. These are hard to find now because there's just not a lot left for this vintage of bike. Now, one of the interesting things when you look at these 2 covers, and it's easier to tell on this one now because it's broken. Here you can see there's a ridge where the seal sits, and then there is no stop for that bottom bearing. So it could go in or out, right, in either direction. In the new case, if you take a look at it, let's see if we can see this here, but you've got the stop for the seal, and then there's the stop for the bearing. So there's only one way for it to go in. Now, in reality, what I should have done was continue what I had been doing in the first video when I took this apart, which was quite simply to try to push the bearing out with the shaft. That eventually would have worked. In fact, I tried that a couple of times. Some of it's not on video. Heated this up, all of the rest of that. Obviously didn't get anywhere. So now when I put the new one back together, I have a new bearing. The new bearing is in the freezer. It's got to go the same way. This has got to go in, and then the bearing has got to go down, and it's got to be pressed in. So the bearing is in the freezer, so it'll shrink a little bit and fit better. What I'm going to do is put that new bearing on. I'm going to use this old bearing to drive the new bearing in very gently. And then I'm going to take a little piece of steel, drill a hole in it this diameter so that I can tap on this bearing if we need to drive it in. I do not want to break this cover. All right, so here's the plan. I took a piece of junk steel that I had laying around. I drilled the right size hole in it. We're going to take this, drop it in here. We're going to put the new bearing on the shaft, and it's still in the freezer. Put this one on top of that, and then use this to tap that bearing gently into place. So, all of that being said, let's get the bearing out of the freezer and be very careful and give this a shot. All right, so here we go. I've got my frozen bearing. You can see I've got my new cover with the shaft in place. I've got it wrapped up in packing material and just propped up on my workbench. So I'm going to get this cold bearing out and slide it down on there. Now we're going to follow that with the old bearing. than my steel. And finally, a socket on top of that. We're going to lightly tap it with my hammer. And then let's take a look and see if we're making any progress. And we did. Looks like it's working. So put it back on there. And we're going to give it a couple of more wraps. Really being careful. Here I'm positioning it so I can see. And take a look. Get the old bearing out of the way. And bingo. It's down where it's supposed to go. That wasn't really too bad at all. All right, so now we've got that cover in place, and you have to make sure when you put it in that you have it going in the right direction. You have to have that little the engagement thing from the clutch with the teeth facing the back of the engine, and then you drop this down on there. You move the rod and make sure it's actually moving that. And then you can see here, I'm using a torque wrench to torque these things down. I get them just lightly snug at first, and then in a crisscross pattern, I go around and torque them. Very, very light torque setting. And you got to be really careful because those things are easy to strip. Take a look at that. You got to admit, that is pretty cool looking. So we skipped all the detail for putting the flywheel and the stator on because there's a million different videos on that. It's really simple. But here's the magnesium cover now on the ignition side, and then finally the black cover on the clutch side. I am really happy with the way that that came out. I think it looks fantastic. And I wish I did a better job taking the other one apart, but if I did, I never would have bought that cover. All right, guys and gals, that's it. This thing is back together. I have a couple of little things, like I'm missing a washer and a circlip here. Figures, I ordered a bunch of parts yesterday. I noticed that today. Other than that, I'm really happy with the way that it went back together. Next time we're going to put that 144 top end on it. We'll get it back in the bike. We'll start to put the bike back together, and it won't be long before we fire this thing up and see how well it pulls. I'm thinking maybe, since this is going to be more of a woods bike, I'm going to put a flywheel weight on it too. But I'm going to try it out in stock form, see what it feels like, and then we'll make the decision on the flywheel weight. Until then, thanks for watching, and if you find my content useful, I'd appreciate it if you like and subscribe.